Welcome back to the Explainer. Let's jump right in because today we are unpacking Tema 20, expression of quality, degree, and comparison. As human beings, one of the absolutely most profound things we do with language is interpret the universe around us. Sure, nouns give us the names of people, objects, and events, but it's the linguistic tools of qualification that truly bring our reality to life. Throughout this academic explainer, we are going to explore exactly how English uses syntax to qualify and ultimately interpret that reality. Okay, so here is our syllabus for today's masterclass. We'll be hitting defining the central adjective, semantic and syntactic classifications, relative clauses as equivalents, expressing degree, and wrapping up with comparison structures. Let's do this. Before we get into the actual mechanics, it's super important to explicitly ground our lecture in the academic canon. The theoretical framework we're using today relies heavily on definitive grammars established by some real heavyweights in the field. We'll be drawing on the comprehensive rules from Quirk and colleagues, the corpus-based insights of Biber, the modern analytical frameworks of Huddleston and Pullum, and the communicative approaches of Leach and Swartwick. Seriously, these texts are the absolute bedrock of English grammar. All right, moving right into section 1, defining the central adjective. To be considered a true central adjective, a word actually has to pass 4 pretty strict tests. First up, the attributive position. Can it sit directly before a noun, like the beautiful garden? Second, the predicative position. Can it act as a complement after a verb, like the garden is beautiful? Third is intensification. Can you put very in front of it? And fourth, comparison. Can it take comparative forms, like more beautiful? Now, a word like hungry easily passes all 4 tests, making it a central adjective. But words that only pass some of these tests, we call those peripheral. Think of the word utter. You can definitely say utter nonsense in the attributive position, but you cannot say the nonsense is utter. It just sounds wrong. Or the word asleep, which only really works predictively. You can say the boy is asleep, but absolutely no one says the asleep boy. And this brilliantly illustrates another really fascinating point about adjectival position. Adjectives don't just modify subjects, they modify objects too. Take a look at this sentence. He pushed the window open. Here, the adjective open functions as an object complement. But notice the causative meaning happening here. It's indicating the direct result of a process. He caused the window to be open. It's just an incredibly efficient use of syntax to express an action and its immediate consequence at the exact same time. That brings us nicely to section 2, semantic and syntactic classifications. First, we have the scale of stative versus dynamic. Most adjectives are stative. They describe permanent, unchanging qualities, like being tall or red. You don't control being tall, and because of this, you generally can't use stative adjectives in the progressive tense. You'd never say, he is being tall. On the flip side, we have dynamic adjectives. These denote qualities that the possessor can temporarily control, like being brave or rude. Because it's controllable, speakers can absolutely use the progressive aspect here. Saying he is being brave implies that bravery isn't his permanent everyday state, but rather a temporary quality he's actively exhibiting right in this moment. Next up is gradability. This is basically the capacity of an adjective to be put on a scale, to be compared or intensified. Now, most adjectives are gradable, right? You can be very happy or happier. But pay close attention to denominal adjectives. These are adjectives derived directly from nouns. They are notably non-gradable because they represent absolute categories. Take the phrase atomic scientist, for example. You cannot be a very atomic scientist. The exact same goes for a medical school or a polar bear. You either belong to that category or you don't. There's no middle ground. So, the really crucial point here is distinguishing how an adjective attaches its meaning to a noun. This brings us to inherent versus non-inherent adjectives. An inherent adjective directly characterizes the referent of the noun. A wooden cross is a cross literally made out of wood. Simple enough. But a non-inherent adjective characterizes the noun indirectly, often as a metaphorical extension. Think of a wooden actor. The actor obviously isn't made of timber. The adjective is indirectly describing their stiff, lifeless performance. Or take an old friend. It usually doesn't mean the friend themselves is elderly. It means the duration of your friendship is old. All right, let's look at section 3, relative clauses as equivalents. To really master relative clauses, you have to understand the mechanics of relative pronouns, which basically act as the bridge between the noun and the clause itself. In step 1, formal academic style dictates that we use whom in object positions. For example, the person whom I saw. But as we know, English is constantly evolving. In step 2, informal everyday style shifts away from whom and heavily favors who or that, like the person who I saw. Finally, in step 3, we have the highly efficient zero relative or contact clause, where the pronoun is just dropped entirely, the person I saw. This shift usually happens because of what we call subject territory, which is the strong psychological tendency in English to use subject pronouns whenever they sit right before a verb. Furthermore, we have to classify how these clauses actually restrict meaning. We contrast defining clauses with non-defining clauses. Defining or restrictive clauses are strictly essential to the sentence. They limit the antecedent. Think about the sentence, "The man who wrote this poem is coming to tea." We absolutely need that clause to know exactly which man we are talking about. But non-defining or non-restrictive clauses merely provide extra, non-essential information. John, who wrote this poem, is coming to tea. Because we already named John, the clause is just bonus info. Structurally, these non-defining clauses are bounded by commas in writing or distinct pauses in speech. And, crucially, they can never, ever use the pronoun that. Let's pivot a little bit and focus on section 4, expressing degree and extent. It is completely vital to understand the linguistic distinction between moving along a relative scale versus hitting an absolute limit. English divides gradable adjectives into scale words and limit words. Scale words exist on a continuum. Think of words like hot or interesting. Because they're on a sliding scale, we can modify them with words like very or fairly. Limit words, however, represent an absolute endpoint. Words like perfect, empty, or identical. You can't really be very identical, right? Instead, you modify limit words with absolute maximizers like completely perfect or approximators like almost empty. This brings us to a highly nuanced but super interesting concept, semantic prosody. Semantic prosody is the underlying positive or negative associative nuance of a word. It explains the subtle but vital differences in how we use downtoners in everyday speech. Take fairly and rather. We typically use fairly for desirable qualities like, it's fairly warm today, but we use rather for undesirable qualities, it's rather cold today. Using them incorrectly can actually subtly confuse a native speaker because it clashes with the expected associative vibe of the word. And now we enter the final section of our explainer. Section 5, Advanced Comparison Structures. To indicate a higher degree, English syntax offers two distinct morphological paths. First up is inflectional comparison. This is where we simply attach a suffix, like or est, to the end of the word. We use this for short, monosyllabic adjectives, making words like cleverer. But for longer, multisyllabic adjectives or adjectives formed from participles, we have to use periphrastic comparison. This involves complex phrasing using separate words, more and most, giving us structures like more beautiful or most interesting. But what happens when we want to express dynamic change over time? Well, English uses specialized structures to handle this exact scenario. The first is the comparative of proportion. This uses the plus a comparative in two parallel clauses to show a correlated change. The older I get, the happier I am. The second is the comparative of gradation. This uses a double comparative linked by the word and to illustrate continuous, ongoing change over time. It's getting colder and colder. These structures are just incredibly elegant ways to capture the fluid, ever-changing nature of reality. As we wrap up this masterclass explainer on Tema 20, I really want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We've journeyed through the strict criteria of central adjectives, the functional power of relative clauses, and the advanced mechanics of degree and comparison. Mastering these nuances, like that subtle shift between inherent and non-inherent qualities, or leveraging semantic prosody perfectly, is the absolute key to unlocking true C2 level proficiency. So armed with this sophisticated syntactic toolkit, how will you consciously qualify your reality today? Thanks so much for learning with me, and definitely keep exploring the depths of English grammar.